Thank you so much for coming, guys. Welcome to our second sci-fi night with Dr. Veith, second lecture with Dr. Veith. Just three quick announcements, actually, before we begin. We will be encouraging questions. Please go ahead and use these little cards to write your questions down, and we'll go ahead and collect those after the lecture. We'll have about an hour or more of lecture, and then a good portion of question and answers. We'll also take verbal questions as well. So be thinking of those as Dr. Veith gives his presentation. Those of you here receiving credit, we have these little cards. Now, these little cards will be picked up at the end of the session by one of our officers, and you'll see them in the back. And last but not least, on your way out, please get refreshments. And we'll enjoy those, please. All right, so we have Dr. Veith, and for those of you who weren't here yesterday, he spoke, his lecture title was Creation to Restoration. And we are enlightened to have that. And for those of you actually who don't even, how many don't know who Dr. Veith is? Okay, Dr. Veith doesn't really need an introduction, but I will give him one anyway. He's a world-renowned lecturer, evangelist. He speaks a lot on Bible prophecy as well. I know a lot of you are interested in that. But he's known for his authorship in many books as well. And so we encourage questions. I don't know if we have title, but anyway, thanks so much, guys, for being here. Yeah. Sorry. No title. Okay. Doesn't need a title, I assure you. This gentleman, thank you so much, Dr. Veith, and please, if you need anything, let us know.
I said it's nice to see young faces and young minds that grapple with the issues of faith and science. Now, most of you didn't put up your hands, so I assume most of you know who I am and what I believe. And everybody is happy to see me, either when I come or when I go. It's true, isn't it? Yes. And I've had lots of experience with students and the evolution question, and even religious students and the evolution question. And it's always the same thing. Some get very angry, some get very antagonistic, some stay friendly but skeptical, and some believe. That's the nature of man. That's the beauty of the freedom of choice. And if God was willing to die for freedom of choice, who are we to curtail it? Now, I was an atheist most of my life. I told yesterday a little bit of why I was an atheist. And I said I was an atheist because of a wrong concept of God. And that wrong concept of God came with the compliments of the theologians. So theologians are not always people who would put a very good spin on the character and the concepts of God. So I was an atheist. I was an antagonistic atheist, an aggressive atheist, roughly like Richard Dawkins. And I couldn't stand God, and even less could I understand or even conceive all the morons who believed in him. One of my favorite pastimes was to stand in front of the television and watch religious programs and laugh like a drain at all these idiots with their crutch called Christianity. And I was in a university which was a religious university when it was conceived as all universities practically on the planet. They all started out as religious institutes. Oxford, Cambridge, they were all religious institutes. and then later became the enemies of religion. I certainly hope it wouldn't happen to you. But it can happen. It can happen. And then in my university, it started off as a Calvinist university, Stellenbosch University, very famous university in southern Africa, with very strong ties and sister relationships and exchange relationships with Tübingen University. And Tübingen University is, of course, the European university which is involved in the evolution paradigm. So everything at my university was evolutionary steeped, with distorters, scientists such as Haeckel, for example, and the Castrea theory, and all of these as the basis for the evolutionary theory. You know, all these things work beautifully on an anatomical level. They work fantastically, and so in comparative anatomy, you study how all these organisms on the planet arose, how a single-celled organism eventually, through clumping, became a morea, a multi-celled organism, and then over periods of time, how this multi-celled organism became a blasteia, a little ball of cells, and then eventually a gastrea when it developed an indentation. And eventually the indentation went right through this little ball of cell, and then you had the basis for all other organisms. You know that you are a ball of cells with a hole all the way through, don't you? You are, to this very day. The one orifice happens to be this one. And the other one is hidden. Sometimes, at least. So that's what you are. And out of this multicellular arrangement, eventually all the various life forms developed. And it looks so logical, and it looks so nice, unless you discuss it or study it on the genetic level, then it becomes a nightmare. Because how did a multicellular organism arise that consisted of differentiated different cells? It's easy to clump cells together, and then they'll all be the same cells. And if you multiply them, they'll all have the same genetic material, they'll all be the same cells. But how did a multicellular organism come about? With different cells and different activations and deactivations of gene patterns and inductions and embryological developments and all of these intricacies, where if something goes wrong, the whole thing collapses. It is incredibly complicated. And so science had to develop the intricate discipline of embryology. Who studied embryology here? You've studied embryology? Induction, does it do something for you? Induction is the chemical process whereby cells in the embryology, as the cells migrate and develop, as the embryo develops, certain cells produce certain chemical compounds which activate certain gene patterns in adjacent cells. So otherwise you'd be one big liver. No. You only develop the liver in one spot, and the kidney in another spot, and the heart in another spot, and the brain in another spot, and a this in another spot, and a that in another spot. And everything happens in that same gene pattern, and it's all induction and chemical stimulation and activation and deactivation of gene patterns and masking and holding and mega complicated stuff. How did it all come into existence? How did all that develop? It is absolutely mind-boggling. And so you have all these questions, but there is no God. You're an atheist. You don't need a God. And so you have to say, well, it must have taken a long time. And then you hide behind all these long ages in order to eradicate these thoughts out of your mind. Now, if you are an atheist, that means there is no God. But everybody knows that there is evil, because you just have to switch your television on and you will find out that there is evil. Have you noticed that? Yes. Now, if you come from an esoteric background, or if you are married into a family from an esoteric background, evil may even become personified. And that was the situation in my life. My wife and I, we had evil personified in our home. But we were atheists. And we didn't believe in God. As I said, I detested God. And you know what I detested even more? When I was a young student, I was in the student residences. That's where I lived. And I lived with the theology students. And they were the wildest students on the campus. They're the ones that thought we only have a very short window of opportunity to let our hair down, and then we have to put on a sanctimonious face forever and ever until the end of our lives, so let's lap it up. So they were the whoremongers and the drinkers and the carousers and you name it, they did it. In the week. But not on Sunday. Then they shoved that book under their arm, the one that's got the leather covering, shove it under their arm, put on a sanctimonious face and go off to church. And I used to look at these guys and I say, what a bunch of creepy hypocrites they are. Why don't they stand for what they stand? If they want to do all these things, then at least call it by its right name. Why be a hypocrite? I hated religion. I hated God. I couldn't stand it. That's me. And then I had this evil in my home. But an evil that was tantamount, that was touchable, that was tangible, that you couldn't get rid of by logical thinking processes. Because what happens if you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning with a nightmare that you're being strangled, and your baby in the next room, in the next second, screams its head off, and then goes into fever cramps, then stops breathing. You rush it to hospital, they battle to save its life. And then you bring it back home, and you go back to your normal life, and 3 weeks later, exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, you have the same dream, and the same thing happens to your child. And 3 weeks later, 2 o'clock in the morning, you have the same thing, and the same thing happens to your child. Don't you sooner or later reach laws of probability which are beyond mathematical computation, and then you say, there is a thing called evil. And that's what happened to us. You can check it out in the medical registers. The files of my kid are this high. I don't know how often it happened, but many, many times. And so, when you reach the end of your logical, scientific paradigm thinking, then you turn to something else. I turned to the church I didn't believe in, the church that I despised, the church that I won't go to all the adjectives. Let's leave it there. And I went and fetched that Roman Catholic priest into my home. And this Roman Catholic priest told me exactly what my life was all about, what the problem was, before I told him. And I said to him, excuse me, I have a problem now. How do you know what's been happening in my home if I haven't told you? He said, "Oh, don't worry about that. I know." He said, "You know what? We have to say a mass in your house. But for that we need the permission of the bishop. And that'll take a while to get." I said, "How long does it take?" He says, "I don't know, a week, 2 weeks. But don't worry, I already have it." Took out a letter from the Bishop of Cape Town, signed approximately 2 weeks before I went to him to say that Mass in my house. Well, how would you feel about that? Would you feel a bit freaky? Huh? I felt a little bit freaky. Came to my house, did his hocus pocus, made his magic water, put it on the windows. When he came into my son's house, something unseen grabbed him. Now this is not conjecture. This is not some stupid story. This is fact. Grabbed him, threw him around in the room that I thought the old man was going to die. And when that was over, and he finished whatever he was doing in the home, gave us his ordination cross, said, "Put that above the child's bed." Left, problem gone. Gone. Now what do you do with that? You're an atheist. You don't believe in God. But here your problem is suddenly solved. Now what you're going to do? You'll have to admit that if you don't do anything, then you become as bad a hypocrite as those who pretend to do it and don't do it and do it anyway while they're not doing it. Is that right? So I went back to church. And I became a good Roman Catholic. And I said my 10 Hail Marys and my 1 Our Father, and I 10 Hail Marys and my 1 Our Father, and I 10 Hail Marys and my 1 Our Father, and so it's on. I had a great relationship with God, repeating myself over and over and over, and I felt nothing. Nothing. No connection. And one day, a young girl got up in my medical class, and she said, "I don't believe what you are saying," because I was speaking on evolution. And I castigated her. I mocked her. I flattened her with science. And I ridiculed her. I told this yesterday already, and she sat down and she cried. And I said to myself, good, that'll teach you a lesson to stand up in my class and question the evolutionary paradigm. But then I had a guilty conscience. And like every good Catholic, when he has a guilty conscience, what does he do? Thank you. He goes to confession. But the priest was incredibly unreasonable. He had been shopping, so he wasn't there. That's very unreasonable. So I had to wait in the church. And I sat there in the church, and I looked at the little red light. Now, those of you who come from a Catholic background, anybody here from a Catholic background? Do you know what that means, the little red light? You don't? You don't remember? Well, no. No, when that if you go into the altar and there's a little red light burning on the altar, a candle with a red exterior, then you know that the consecrated host is in the chalice. That's what it means. Now, the consecrated host is the transubstantive body of Christ. Is that right? It's God in the flesh. But it's the God of the crucifixion. He's dead. It's his body. So I tried talking to it, and then I started thinking about this as I was sitting in this church, and I realized I was speaking to a corpse. And there was no two-way communication because corpses don't communicate. Have you noticed that? And I thought about this for a while, and then I said to myself, you know what? This whole religion thing is a whole load of hogwash. And this priest is not coming, and it's good because I don't need him anymore. I'm out of here. But I made a big mistake. Actually, it wasn't a mistake. It was the greatest thing I ever did in my life. Before I left that little church, I said, God, if you exist, show yourself to me. And I left. Never to go back to the church again. That was my intention. Now, can you imagine that? I'll backtrack a little bit. At the time when we had this crisis in our house, just after the crisis, I had an Adventist carpenter come and renovate my kitchen. But I didn't know he was an Adventist. He was just a carpenter. He was a German cabinet maker. And I said, modify my kitchen. Make it a reasonable kitchen. That's what he did. But as he walked in, these Adventists, they are a pain in the neck. As he walked in, he said, I walk with the Lord Jesus Christ. Do you mind if I tell you something about him? Whew. I said to him, you walk with your Jesus Christ, but I want a kitchen. Give me a kitchen and leave me alone with your Jesus Christ. And he said, okay. And he gave me the kitchen. But he said, would you take this, please? And he gave me a pamphlet. And that pamphlet lay in a drawer for 1 year. Now, I've just said that prayer in that Catholic church, and I go home, and I look for something, and I can't find it. Fortunately, for emergency situations like that, the Lord gave us wives. Right? They know where everything is. They're absolutely irritating when it comes to something like that. So I asked her, where is it? And she said, it's in that drawer under that book. Yeah, there it was. But as I looked in this drawer, I picked up this pamphlet. I said, where's this thing come from? And I remembered this freaky guy who was walking with his Lord. And I read it. And it was a pamphlet that said nothing other than that the commandments had been changed. That's it. Had the Bible commandments in the middle, the Lutheran commandments on the left, and the Catholic commandments on the right, and it said, had been changed. And so I called this man over, and he came to my house, and I said to him, what's this? I called him after a year. I said, you remember you put a kitchen? He says, yes, I remember. I said, get yourself over here. And he got himself over there. And we discussed. And we went through Daniel and we went through Revelation in 2 days. Right through the night. We just sat and we went through it and we went through it and we went through it. And we discussed Daniel chapter 7, the little horn. I don't know what they teach you here, but the little horn is Roman Catholicism. Whether they teach it here or not, it's Roman Catholicism. All the parameters are there. Now, that totally freaked me out. Because what about this priest who was in my house? And he cleared up all of this issue. And you know what? As I was grappling with these things, after a whole year, this same priest phones me. And he says to me, you are in big danger. Out of the blue, no contact with this man. Live miles from him. For a year I hadn't seen him. You are in big danger. You get back to the church immediately. I hadn't even told anyone that I was leaving, right? This is all within a short space of time. I said, what do you mean? He says, your father is suffering on your behalf. My father was dead. I said to him, how do you know my father is suffering on my behalf? And he said, your father is suffering in purgatory because you are not doing what is right. You must get back to the church. Unfortunately for this Roman Catholic pastor, I'd just done the study on the state of the dead. And my problem with the false theology of hell was also resolved. But I played along with him, and I said to him, how do you know that my father is suffering on the other side in purgatory as a consequence of me? And he said the nuns told him. That piqued me. I said, the nuns told you. How do they know? The spirits told them. Now that's fascinating. So that Roman Catholic priest who came to my house knew ahead of time what was going on in my house because the spirits told him. Is this all chance? Or do you think this is some spectacular design? I think this is some spectacular intervention of God in a person's life. Make a long story short, I eventually did get to know the God of the Bible, who was very, very different to the God of theology. And I could happily discard the God of theology in a waste paper basket where he belonged, and embrace the God of the Bible, who was totally different. But I had a problem. These commandments had been changed. And one of them in particular, the fourth commandment. And the fourth commandment says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work. But the seventh commandment, or the seventh day, is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your sons, your daughters, your maidservant, your manservant, your ox, your donkey. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the sea, and all that in them is, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord commanded you to keep the seventh day. Pathetic. That's the most pathetic commandment in the whole of the Bible. How can you have such a pathetic commandment? How can you keep one day to commemorate 6 days that never happened? Right? So I said to this carpenter, this is pathetic. I cannot keep the Sabbath day for 6 days. There are no 6 days. There are millions of years. And it's a long, long, long process that brought this about. He said, no, you're wrong. This man's a carpenter. And I'm a zoologist. So I argued with him and frustrated him beyond measure. And so he said he'll bring me some books. So he went and brought me some books. And I read them, and I gave them back to him, and I said to him, I've never read such drivel in all my life. So he was a bit taken aback, but he was stubborn. He said, I'll bring you some more, and he brought me some more books, which I also gave back to him, and I said, I've never read such drivel in all my life. And I argued with him about evolution, and I used all my whatever I had, and I threw it at him. And he got so frustrated that he got up and he said, screaming at me, he says, you know what? I don't have a problem with evolution. You have a problem with evolution. You solve it. Goodbye. That was a very sound argument. Because it squarely put the ball in whose court? In my court. Okay. So I'm grappling with this. I'll tell you a couple of stories. You'll think I'm weird. Who cares? Everybody thinks I'm weird anyway. I'll tell you a couple of stories of an occult world out there where people say, oh, conspiracy theories, cool, conspiracy theories. Have you heard that before? No, it's conspiracy ignorance, but never mind. Leave it at that. In all this grappling and all this thinking, I'm saying to myself now, all of these things happening in my house, so there obviously is evil. If there is evil, then there must also be good. Then I have all these things in the Bible and this priest phoning me and knowing ahead of time, and this is all occult. So I know that that's deception. Been lied to on a religious front all my life. From year 8, I'm an atheist because I've been lied to. Why shouldn't the scientific world also be lying? Who knows whether this is a farce? I'm not talking about science. People say you can't believe in God and be a scientist at the same time. Don't make a mistake. The problem is not science. The problem is the philosophy of origins. It's a philosophy. It's not science. Science is hard-tack, empirical. You do the study. You do double blinds. You make the experiment. And whatever comes out, that's either black or it's white or it's whatever. But we're not arguing here about science. Don't get duped into science saying that creation is religion and evolution is science. Bull! Can I speak straight with you guys? Evolution is a theory of origins. It's got nothing to do with science. And they'll tell you that they've got, their natural selection. I'll come to that if we have time. But I want to give you a little bit of background, why I am like I am, why I'm so weird. And so I'm arguing and grappling with this thing, and I'm sitting in my office, and I'm busy right at that time, I was giving the genetics course to the postgrad students. And I'm dealing with issues of genetics and how it functions and how genes are activated and deactivated. And believe me, it's complicated. There's nothing simple about it. And the students suffer to understand the finer nuances. And let's face it, most of the lecturers pretend to understand it. It's very complicated. And I'm thinking about how did all this come about? And I'm sitting in my office and I'm saying, you know what? Maybe there is something wrong with evolution. After all, I'd moved from being a gradualist to a punctuated equilibriumist because the fossil record didn't bear out gradualism. There are no hordes of intermediaries unless you want to take a natural variety, and put them in a sequence and say, well, there you have your intermediaries. You know, I could take human hips today, ladies. I could take human hips and put them from very narrow to very broad and say, well, look here, this wonderful paradigm with just one error. They're not sequential in time, they're contemporaneous, they're all here at the present time, so it's just variety in the gene pool. It's got nothing to do with evolution. So I'm not impressed with the intermediaries that they put out there, which are mind sequences and not paleontological sequences. And that's why I was a punctuated equilibriumist while I was still an atheist. So I'm not impressed by those arguments, and I know that we try to use them to explain evolution. They're a lie. And honest evolutionists become neo-Darwinists. They become punctuated equilibriumists because they have no choice. So I'm sitting there and I say, God, I don't know if you exist, but if you do exist and there's something wrong with this evolutionary theory and this man has put the ball in my court, then show me. I'm going to the library. I'm going to fetch a book on genetics. And I look at the books on genetics and I wander over to the paleontology section. Okay, and I take out the book on paleontology and I start reading it. I'm just looking through it and my paleontology colleague comes up to me by chance in the library. And he says, you know, we just got the new edition of that one. I said, oh, where is it? He says, I think it's still in the box on the back. It hasn't been unpacked, but it's just arrived. We ordered it, remember? And I said, oh, great, thank you. I go to the back. I'm checking the boxes. Oh, here's the new one. I take it. And I'm thinking, well, take them both. So I took them both to my office. By the way, my university had the largest evolution-based library in the Southern Hemisphere. Only Tübingen University can compete. The only two. Not even the United States will have a library on evolution like that. I guarantee it. So I'm reading these two books in my office at the same time. I've got them both open. And I'm checking what the new edition adds to the old edition. And as I'm reading, I see they explain the evolution of this or that organism, and they have all the evolutionary trees and the, all the systematics and the cladistics and all of those issues. And the old one says, unfortunately, we do not have any of the intermediate fossils here. We have nothing here. There's a gap here. It was quite honest. And I'm reading in the new one, the same one, and I'm looking what new did they find. And there's not a word of that. Not a word. It's just covered in scientific jargon that you wouldn't be able to pick that even up. And I said, hang on a second now. I've never noticed this. And I go through the two books, and right throughout that book, there's a thick book like this. Everywhere, it's the same story. I think to myself, this is a conspiracy. No, I didn't know that word yet. I'm only used to it now. There's something here. There's a cover-up. There's something wrong. And I'm grappling with this issue. And I'm busy with genetics. And evolution, natural selection cannot operate at the level of the genotype. Cannot. Natural selection can only operate at the level of what is expressed in the phenotype. You see, you have to select two options. You have to select from what is there. Natural selection, as I said yesterday, is a very poor deity. It cannot create anything. It can only select between options that are already there. So, how did everything come about at the level of the genotype? There's only one possibility, it's chance. So random chance, random chemical reactions. Now if you know a little bit about biochemistry, and you know about putting DNA sequences together, you cannot achieve it without enzymes under natural processes by any means whatsoever. What was first, the chicken and the egg, the enzyme or the DNA? Well, they say it was RNA was the precursor. Same problem. In fact, when you take it down to the final analysis, you cannot achieve it on this planet. So maybe it happened by panspermia. Maybe it happened on another planet. What have you done? You've transported the problem from your non-resolution area to another area where it will be exactly the same. You're just transporting the problem because you can't solve it here. It's like Einstein's relativity theory. You can't solve what's happening and what you measure by empirical evidence, so you make a mathematical formula and it solves the problem. Then it becomes, it's relative. Is that really science? Or is that manipulating science to resolve an issue that you do not understand? So everything here happened by chance. To even one gene to come about by chance, it is mind-boggling. And here at this level, things can be sorted out. That's like saying, this book with the instructions to build this aeroplane came about by chance. Not only that, you have to say that this book came about by chance, and the entire process from book to aeroplane also came about by chance. Can you help me? Who wrote the book? You don't know who wrote the book. Do you know who wrote the book? Do you know who wrote the book? Chance wrote the book. It's a very intricate book. It's very complicated. It's not an aeroplane that comes out, it's you. The most complicated thing that the universe can imagine, with all its intricacies, with all its interconnection, with all its beautiful harmony. And I was thinking about the process of meiosis and the process of genetic transcription and translation and inductions and all of these things. Whew. Has anybody ever explained to you how that double helix, when it is transcribed, how it unfolds? It's a double helix. It's 2 cords of string. You start pulling 2 cords and opening up at the same time, what happens to the string in the middle? If you hold 2 sides and I hold 2 sides and we start pulling, what happens in the middle? It becomes very tight. Can't have it very tight. You have to open a piece so that you can transcribe that particular gene. But when you do that, you're pulling it apart like this. So in actual fact, there are enzymes which link around it over here, and they cut the DNA, and they hold the 2 strands like in a ball-bearing thing, and they allow the pressure to be released so that you can open it without it being snarled. Eventually you start reading your DNA, but the one reads up and the other one reads down. And in case you want to make a mistake, you have a problem. So you have your transcriptase enzyme going, it's going so fast it could make a mistake. So following it are 5 editase enzymes coming behind it. Why 5? Because they have to work slower. They're proofreaders. And when they see a mistake, if we let this mistake through, Johnny's going to end up a cabbage. We better fix it that Johnny becomes not a cabbage. And he has to say, excuse me, I can't just replace the wrong one because that's not how my enzyme works. We have to retract it till the beginning. And the other 5 then go together in harmony. And 5 of them trying to keep up with 1 and repairing every mistake along the line, and in the same time untwirling and then cutting and twirling and cutting and twirling. And then when it's finished, it has to wind up again, right? So cut, ball bearing, ball bearing, ball bearing, and then you have the other enzyme, the ligases come, bind it all together, that it's perfect. That's how the book is opened. Fascinating. If you explain it now in great detail like you would at a postgrad course, I'm just giving you the very short synopsis. It boggles the mind. How did it come into existence? It's genotype. It's never subject to natural selection. Only the consequence thereof, the expressed phenotype, is subject to natural selection. So all of that, with all its intricacy, came about by chance. And I started thinking about this, and I said to myself, you know what? You've been an idiot all your life. There's no way this thing happened by chance. This is design. It smacks of design. Now think about sexual reproduction. You were created male and female. Yesterday I spoke about beauty. You don't have to be beautiful to reproduce, right? Now you're an incredibly handsome man. I'm sure that the ladies are falling over your feet, but not everybody is as lucky as you. Does he have a selective advantage over anyone else here? No, I don't think so. So let's think about sexual reproduction. Sorry, I didn't mean to embarrass you. My students used to hide. They don't want to sit in the front, they sit in the back. But I change it. I sometimes go to the middle and to the back, so there was no point in hiding. Think about meiosis. That's even more complicated. More complicated because now you have 2 sets of chromosomes coming together, splitting into chromatids, and then they cross over. They share genetic information. But it has to be precise at the exact locus. If there's one nucleotide out, you end up a cabbage. Because it's a triple coat, the cat and the hat. If you cut it one lecture too far, it would be It has to be precise. So they cross over with all this intricate enzymes, binding, de-stress enzymes, editases, ligases, all coming together. But the problem with a crossover is you have one crossover there, one crossover there, one crossover there, one crossover there, one crossover there. The entire DNA chromatid sequence is snarled. It's a total mess if you're not careful. And when you take one from this side and you bring it over to that side, and you're going to that side, to that side, eventually you look like that, right? And so there are enzyme systems which take this molecule and unsnarl it by rotating it to the right position. The next one's waiting there, cuts it, turns it around, puts it in the right position, and the same happens with the other one. It's beautiful. How did it come into existence? It's genotype, it's not phenotype. It came about by chance. If you want to believe this, you're welcome to believe it. But it's no longer science. It's faith. It's faith. So what I want to say to you is don't let anyone dupe you. I don't want to go into all of this. I don't want to give all the examples. There's this silly Castrea theory, but never mind. I just want to show you one more slide. I know I've gone totally out of kilt here, and I'm sorry. One more slide. Built-in variety in the gene pool. We're all different, every single one of us. Every single one of us unique. Well, the two who are exactly the same, please stand up. And don't try and fool me with a twin, because I'll fetch your mother. Nobody. Okay. Reproductive exchange. Besides, at the genetic level, the preparation in meiosis to make the two gametes, that's not enough. You need the two anatomies, male and female. And thank God they're very different, right? You need the two anatomies. Where did the two anatomies come from? Remember, the two anatomies in themselves could not have been selected for. The reproductive system, genetically, could not have been selected for, because the increased variety in the gene pool, which has to be expressed in the phenotype, that is the place where natural selection will start to operate. So everything up until the variety in the offspring came about by chance. Male and female came about by chance. Whew, you have to be a mega faith champion to believe that. And these are questions which started bugging me. And you know what? I went and I put this list on the board. And I discussed each one a little bit. Crossing over during meiosis, I just talked a little bit about that. Recombination of chromosomes, transposable DNA. Oh, it's such a great evolutionary tool. Poppycock. If it doesn't happen precisely, if it's not slotted in exactly in the right gene complex, if it isn't harnessed to all those enzymes, it doesn't work. It's design. Even drastic rearrangements of the chromosomal composition is equally as complex and has to be absolutely precise. Otherwise, the offspring is not going to be what the parent was. It's going to be something else. And there's so much variety in gene pools that you could end up from a caterpillar to being a butterfly. Or vice versa. Would you like that, ladies? If you were known as a butterfly, would you like to be a caterpillar in the next generation? Nobody would fall in love with you. But that's the variety in your gene pool. Where did all this stuff come from? Natural selection had no part to play. So it has to be designed. And this is my point. if evolution is faith after all, then don't let yourself be lied to that it's science. It's faith. If you want to believe it, that's fine. Because God, in His mercy, has given us a freedom of choice. And you are free to exercise it. And that's what I like about God. He didn't force me to follow Him. He said, if I be lifted up, I will draw all men to me. In a marriage situation, you can only be really happy if you're free. If you have a partner that forces you and chains you to his side, you will always be a slave. And you will never be truly happy. Only when He cuts the chain and He says you're free, you can go, does love become worthwhile. Because if that partner says, I don't want to go because I love you, then you can have pure, unadulterated freedom and unadulterated love. And that's the gospel. And if you can't read the gospel in the gene pool, well, then that's your problem. But the gene pool convinced me that God is right. And the rest, the paleontology and the fossil record and the radiometric dating and the this and the that and the other, every single one of them comes down eventually to a choice. Because all of them are based on basic assumptions. Whether the assumption is unchangeable circumstances over all eons, whether the assumption is zero resets on clocks, whether the assumption is, it doesn't matter, they all end up on assumptions. So all of them enter the realms of faith. And here you are in a Christian institution with a responsibility of representing the character of God, which I've tried to give you a little glimpse of. What should your duty be? To add insult to injury, or to lift up the Creator God, who gave you this magnificent freedom that you have to choose? And when the whole world forsakes Him, and all His disciples left, He turned to the few that remained and He said, do you also want to go? Did He stop them? No. Do you also want to go? And they said, where shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Where shall we go? And that's your choice. Choose. Choose who you want to believe. Choose who you want to follow. That's okay. My students all fall asleep in my class. I'm used to it. And this is a Christian institute, but this is not just any Christian institute. What kind of institute is this? This is a Seventh-day Adventist institute. And if it says Seventh-day Adventist, that means you subscribe to the principles of the seventh day with all its consequences, and you believe in the second coming. And that means you believe in the beginning and the culmination of the gospel. If you have made that choice, then stand by it. If you're going to trip up that choice, then don't pretend. Because there are people watching you and they will say, hypocrites. They say they believe something, but they do something else. Make a choice. God bless you. Thank you. You can ask your question.
Thank you so much, Dr. Veith. We'll be starting our question and answer session of the forum right now. If you guys have written questions, please pass them to the aisles. We'll also be taking verbal questions. We'll be walking around with microphones as well. We encourage those. If you didn't get enough of Dr. Veith while he was down here, I encourage you strongly to visit both his websites, actually the organization that he's part of, Amazing Discoveries, and also his website, www.walterveith.org. And if it's all right with you...
I don't even know about that one. Who
Yeah,
did that
no,
one
it's a great
for me?
website. I love it.
Is it?
Anyway,
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and write them on the board. But I will warn you, it's like I would encourage you to pick a day where you don't have anything going on, because once you start his lectures, you won't want to leave. I'm telling you, they're just that compelling. They're beautiful, definitely. So without further ado, please, anyone have any verbal questions? We'll come around. Awesome, for sure.
Yeah, yes, Professor, you were saying that this book that the
Who's speaking where?
oh, I'm right here.
Oh, there.
Sorry about that. I want to see if I can get all this into one thought. This priest that came to your house that had these stories that knew things about you. Apparently, he got them from the nuns.
Yes.
Who got them from the spirits.
Yes.
And that's creepy to you.
That's
creepy, you were saying.
That's creepy, yes.
But how is that creepier than the Bible, who got it was written by some dudes that got the words from spirits? It sounds very similar to me. When let me see if I can. We're familiar with construction as humans. We build things, so it seems like a cop-out for us. You were saying it's a cop-out to push the idea on a different planet and say, oh, well, they must have come from a different planet. That's a bit of a cop-out.
It's a cop-out, yes.
Right. Well, how is it more of a cop-out to say, well, we can't solve any of these things that you were talking about. We don't know exactly how they happen. There's always a choice. It comes down to the point where we say,
God did it.
God did it, and then our problem's solved. All of a sudden our answer is answered, or our question's answered. I mean, to me that sounds, because we're familiar with construction.
I've got your question.
Very good, thank you.
And I like you, and I like your question. Well, which of the dudes do we believe? If I'm going to argue for evolution, I'm going to come to a point from where did that come from, where did that come from, where did that come from, where did the Big Bang come from, where did the energy or matter come from, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to get to that point, right? When I come from a religious viewpoint, where did that come from, where did that come from? Well, it come up, you end up with God. You're saying, where did he come from? Okay. So both science and religion come to the point of zero answer. I cannot tell you where God came from, and evolution cannot tell you where the Big Bang came from, or where the energy came from to create the Big Bang, or the energy, or whatever. We come to the same point. So now, we have two options. I can look at where the nothing came from that created everything that we have here, and I can conclude natural evolution is what did it, and I start with the basic assumption that nothing exploded and created everything. And here I am. That's science. You can check out the physics, and you can see that's exactly what they say. Or I can say, be naive, and say, God did it. At least I belong to someone, and here I am, and I still can't prove it. Hang on, I'm not done. I'm still answering it. Both of them come to the same point. I don't know where they come from. But now, what if God did it? Is that all the evidence he gave me? He put me here, and he left me to my own devices, and he said, there, carry on. No, he didn't. He spoke to prophets. You said it's freaky. Sure, it's freaky. I would freak out if I had to have an experience like that. Ellen White freaked out when she had an experience like that. I'm sure all the prophets, Daniel says he freaked out. Read Daniel chapter 10, he freaked out when he had the experience. And here this God comes and he tells me history in advance, throughout all the ages. It's something called prophecy. The nuns didn't do that. The nuns just told me what was already there, what they had perceived, what the devil was doing himself. But they couldn't tell in advance what was going to happen. No. He knew that there was a problem, and he knew that he was working with my mind, and he knew that I was talking to my wife. I have to get help from the Catholic priest, and he prepared them. He was clever. But God tells history in advance in Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel chapter 7 with every single detail of what these powers would do, and you can check it out, and there's past fulfilled prophecy, and there's prophecy fulfilling in the present, and he says this is what it's like. And he tells the story, and now I add prophecy to my scale of skepticism, and I put it on this side of the scale, and then I see, well, wow, here is a reason why I'm here. Here is a story of origins, and here is a historic issue called the cross. Did that ever happen? Did any of these events ever happen? Is this what says in this book, this Bible that I read that made no sense whatsoever to me? Did this ever happen? And then you meet a funny little old man like that one over there with the grey hair, that funny one whose heart is always strangely warm. And you go into the Middle East and you walk in the deserts and you go to the archaeological sites and you see every time, boom, the skeptic said it's not so and the Bible is vindicated. The skeptic said it's not so and the Bible is vindicated. And archaeology proves the statements in the Bible, and prophecy proves the statements in the Bible, and history developed exactly like it said. Now you're not just arguing from the same paradigm as science brings. You have a whole host of paradigms that you add to your scale, and the scale can swing. And then comes the final nail in the coffin, the absolute personal experience that you then have with God, and the walk that you have with God, and the realization of how He helps you, and how He intervenes in your life, and how He saves you. And the very first evangelistic meeting that I held all on my own, I was apprehensive. I changed my whole philosophy, and here I'm holding an international, it was in Canada. I'm out of my country. I have nobody backing me. I have no friends. I have someone who's working with me that I don't yet know. But I had a relationship. And I said yes. And I go onto that stage and I start telling my experiences, and I start giving Bible studies on the little horn, and antagonism develops. And people start shouting at me. I had double lectures. I'll tell you the story. Double lectures. People shouting at me in between lectures. They eventually wanted to beat me up. And then a little man with Down syndrome. Every day in the lectures he used to come and he used to sit in the front. And that chair was always open. There were 1,260 seats in that theater. Go and check it out. It was the Massey Theater in Vancouver. 1,260 seats. And one seat was always open, and he used to come and sit there. And then when these aggressive people came to attack me, this little Down syndrome guy came and he went through them, and he put his arm around me and he put his little head here and he sang. La, 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 la. He was very down. He couldn't even speak. You cannot shout at someone, even less can you beat someone up who has a Down syndrome kid hanging on him. It's a physical impossibility. So the next day, I'm giving my lectures and I'm saying, well, I'm in trouble here. And I'm thinking, where's the Down syndrome kid? And I'm stretching my first lecture, and there he walks in. Oh, it was a side door like this. There were two side doors. He walks in there, comes and sits in his spot. His seat is open. He goes and sits down. I finish my lecture with a sigh. I start forward, and the aggro guys come running, and my Down syndrome guy comes, and he hangs on me. Oh, I was so attached to him. 13 lectures in a row. 13 days in a row. Every night, the Down syndrome kid. And then we moved the lectures, because the halls are very expensive. After the intro, we moved the lectures to the church. Other side of Vancouver. Vancouver is a big city. Who's been to Vancouver? That's a big city. Other side of Vancouver. Down syndrome kid no longer there. No antagonism anymore, because those people had been left behind. The people who come to the church are really quite serious. So I'm lecturing there, and I finished the whole series. And Adventists are always very kind to me. I spoke from 8 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock that night. Stone dead, tired. In the last lecture, the door opened, and guess who walks into the church? The Down syndrome kid. And he comes and sits in the front. And I'm thinking, this is weird. Because this Down syndrome kid cannot possibly come here by himself. I'm on the other side of Vancouver. There's no adult with him. There are no parents with him. At the Massey, I still thought, well, maybe he's part of the furniture. You know, maybe he belongs to the one who runs the place or whatever. Maybe his dad's sitting in the back there somewhere. I don't know. But here, forget it. How did he get there? And after the lecture, I'm packing up my slides, and the Down syndrome kid sits there in the chair, and the people go out into the foyer to take drinks. And I'm still packing in my slides. I'm all alone in the church. I have no verification. You just have to take my word for it. And I'm looking at him. And he's not doing anything. He's just sitting and I'm packing my slides. They were all in carousels in those days. There were no computers. This is a long time ago. And then he gets up. And it makes cold shiver run down me. He comes, and I'm standing on the stage, and he walks up onto the stage, and he comes to me, and he puts his arms around me, and puts his little head down there, and I'm looking at him, and I'm saying, hi there, and I'm putting my slides into the thing, continuing, and he just stands there, and he holds me. He does nothing. So eventually, I'm thinking about all this, and I'm saying, this is weird. So I turn around, and I take the little dance kid, and I push him away from me, and I take a step back, and I say to him, do me a favor, tell me, are you a man or are you an angel? And he looks at me, and he does this. And he walked out. And nobody ever saw him again. And every single campaign that I have, when people run onto the stage, like in Slovenia, they ran onto the stage to take care of me on a permanent basis. And the president there, and these people warned that they would beat up everyone in the hall, and they called the police. And the police came with 250 people, 250 policemen, and they surrounded the hall and all the doors, and the chief of police sat in the front. You see, God decided my audience wasn't big enough. I needed some policemen to hear the message as well. But when those guys ran onto the stage, I didn't have that much fear. Not that much. It's weird. My little translator nearly had a heart attack. I said, don't stress. Don't stress. Because I knew my Down syndrome kid was there. I couldn't see him anymore. I didn't need to see him anymore. But I know he's there. And he's not a Down syndrome kid. You watch him one day. He can kill 185,000 Assyrian soldiers in one touch. Those that are with us are more than they that are with them. And I cannot prove that to you. And I cannot give you empirical evidence. That's my experience. And there are 1,000 witnesses to corroborate that story. So now you add experience to your scale. And now we're way out of the realms of science. That's my answer. Thank you.
First of all, I should have. I'm right here, by the way. Microphone didn't move very far.
I should apologize because I raised my hand initially saying that I didn't know who you were, and then after a few minutes of you lecturing, I realized I've heard you speak before, so I apologize to mislead you to begin with.
No problem.
I'm trying to put together sort of what I can gather is your picture of God, and so what am I accurate in thinking that you think of God as being like a personal God, like one that is taking like active measures to change things on Earth? Because the reason I ask is you said something about, you said the word intervention before.
Yes.
And I was curious to know, like, is it your belief that like God intervened in your life and that's how things changed, or are you open to the possibility that like God was always there and the truth was there and the design was there and the plan was there, and then enough stuff went awry for you that you finally were like, that you made the choice, and then once you had done that, the thing.
Let me say, even as an evolutionist, even as an atheist, I have to admit there is no such thing as an atheist. It doesn't exist. Everybody has some philosophy. And maybe there was something out there, I don't know. But everything is naturalistic. He's totally divorced from everything that happens on the planet. He has no direct involvement. You can have an idea like that. But the cross negates that. The cross is a very personal encounter of a very personal God with very personal emotions and very personal concerns about every single one whom he associates with. And that's the God that I have got to know. This God is a personal God. He's a personal friend. I can pour out my heart to him as I would to a friend. I wouldn't like to go anywhere, least of all to La Sierra, to this hall, without him. I cannot afford to be without him. And I have learned that no matter what the situation, whether it's a good time or whether it's a bad time, didn't Paul say that too? In good times, in bad times, in hunger, in poverty, in prosperity. No matter what happens, I know he's there. I know he takes care of us. I told the story, my wife over there recently ran out to go and tell my daughter not to go away, drive off without praying. And in her haste, she stumbled and fell and smashed her hip and smashed her thigh. And she had to have total replacement of the hip, but there was nothing to screw it on. They had to put bone in there. They didn't have bone. She lay on the operation table for 12 hours, waiting for replacement bone to come. They put it together. You ask yourself the question, Lord, look, why me? Why us? We do all these things. Wrong question. Why not us? Why not us? Why should it only happen to other people, right? But then, eventually you get to the point where you say, it's hard because this thing doesn't grow on and the screws are loose and you're walking for a year and a half on crutches and you're thinking, does God really care about my personal situation? And my wife was doing shopping for something, and we were in a mall, and she was looking in the stores to see if there was a sale on here or a sale on there, and we were in a hurry. And then she came to this one store and she looked, is there a sale on? There was no sale on. And she had this distinct impression, not a voice, but an overwhelming impression go inside. And she resisted it and said, why? There's no sale on. And then she got the overwhelming impression, go inside now, and she took a step forward. This was just a few weeks ago. And in her heart she had this turmoil. Does God still care about little me, or is it only, this husband's ministry that's important. I mean, people feel like that sometimes. As she took the step forward, the huge sign in a huge metal frame came crashing down from the ceiling right behind her. And the guard at the door, because in Southern Africa we have guards at the door because otherwise your shop is empty without the till being full, said, "Madam, you could have been killed." She didn't care two hoots about that. She knew one thing. The God that had permitted all these things in her life still cared. It's experience that does it. I can tell you 1,000 experience. Francois can tell you 1,000 experience. If you don't venture out and take this God at his word, you will never have an experience. And your light will go out in skepticism and darkness. Take a step. Trust him. See what happens.
Sorry, we're keeping the mic here. But I got a degree in biology, and I also grew up Adventist. And I have a problem sometimes trying to fuse the two together. So, for example, like one of the things I studied about while studying biology that I couldn't ever wrap my mind around is if, let's say we're talking about evolution, and I remember studying that. Well, we have 23 sets of chromosomes. Chimpanzees have 24, and because evolutionists believe that
the two are related.
We're related. Why is it that humans have less, one missing set of chromosomes? And that recently it was discovered that, I think in the 3rd or 4th chromosome of humans, that it's actually 2 chromosomes fused together, 2 short chromosomes, and it actually has 2 telomeres within that chromosome. So how do you explain things like that? Or the facts that the coral reefs are millions of years old. Do you think that truth is actually somewhere between the creation story and evolution story, that they could meet in the middle somewhere, that God has guided evolution, or that maybe God was involved in the creation, but that maybe we're not thinking outside the box of how creation could have taken place. Maybe God's a playful God and like to play with things like growing and evolving. What do you think about that?
Well, let's fast the first one first. Everything has a common design. The whole of life has a common design. And it's based on the genetic composition, which is in the gene pool. Later on you have the eukaryotes, and you have a nucleus, and you have chromosomes, and all the information about who and what you are is written on those chromosomes. Different categories of organisms have common chromosomal arrangements. It's common design. All cars have wheels. All cars have steering wheels. It's common design. There are few basic features, but you have different varieties. So, if you take, for example, the wild dogs and the wolves, their chromosome number varies from 36 to about 76. If they have 36 chromosomes, they're very long chromosomes. If they have 76 chromosomes, they're very short chromosomes. If you do gene mapping, then they're actually the same gene maps, they're fused chromosomes. So you have chromosomal fusion. And the entire family basically has the same genetic arrangement, but they're all different. And the same with all the primates. They have the same basic pattern of design, but they're totally different. So I'm not faced with a chromosomal fusion or a chromosomal disjunction. That wouldn't faze me. It's common design. When it comes to the way the genes are expressed, there's a lot of DNA which is controlling DNA, and you can get how many tunes from a piano? Millions. Depends how you express them, right? It'll always be piano music. The difference between a chimpanzee and a human being is just 2% of chromosomal material. But the difference is vast. And the same with all the other creatures. And you don't know what the latent DNA or even the oncogenes are doing. We haven't even got an idea. We haven't even gone there. And how are certain characteristics, like behavioral characteristics, inherited even. Then you're moving into oncogenes philosophy. We don't understand enough of it. But common design could answer that problem. When it comes to corals, you are judging by current conditions in terms of coral growth. Coral growth is inhibited by light, and if the coral is already in existence, there will be virtually zero growth, minimal growth, because it is inhibited, the equilibrium has been reached. If temperatures were different, if the calcium carbonate relationships in the past were different, you would have totally different coral rate growths. And if you study the literature on coral growth, you will find very rapid growth, that even Unui Tak, which is 1,400 meters of coral, most of which is actually filled in material and not new growth. Besides that, even if we ignore that, you can get the entire thing using maximal current growths in about 1,400 years. You don't need thousands of millions of years. Of course, if you take the road now, when it is in equilibrium, you'll need a lot longer time. So what are you using? You're using the formula of uniformitarianism. You can get around these arguments. Now, if you had an Earth where basalt was eroded into warm subterranean water rich in carbon dioxide, then you would get huge calcium carbonate deposition, and that's where we have all our limestone deposits from. Imagine how much calcium carbonate must have been in solution and how that must have affected coral growth rate in the past. So you cannot use the principle of uniformitarianism. It's a scientific principle, but it doesn't rest on a very firm foundation. You can look at the individual things and have your faith shaken, or you can look at the bigger picture. My suggestion is look at the bigger picture. Is our time up, gentlemen? One more at the back there. I'm not making the statement to either shoot it down or to propagate it. I merely made the statement that relativity and the mathematical formulation that goes along with it is a mathematical solution to physical problems, and there's nothing wrong with having mathematical solutions to physical problems, but they're still mathematical solutions. And maybe some mega genius will have another mathematical solution for another of those paradigms in the future. So it doesn't make it an absolute. That's all I'm saying. Now, tell me something. Do chimpanzees ever have the philosophical thoughts that you now have espoused and discuss amongst themselves the intricacies of faith?
I don't speak chimpanzee. Chimpanzees don't speak English. We'll never know what we're talking about.
All right. But judging from the empirical evidence that you have so far, have you ever seen the chimpanzees sitting together philosophizing on these issues? Yes or no? You have?
They eat out of each other's hair and they make noises.
Okay. All right. I get your point. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Okay? So faith is word-based, not experience-based. I don't base my faith on that experience. Because if I had to base my faith on that experience, then any experience that I have in my life can lead me by the nose in any direction whatsoever. That's not my faith. My faith is word-based. And I have enough historical evidence, empirical historical evidence, that what the Word says in its historicity is true. Even when it was the only source on the planet that was presenting that empirical evidence. It's only 120 years that the science of archaeology has confirmed what the Bible has said about kings like Nabonidus or Belshazzar or whatever the biblical figure is. Those names never appeared anywhere outside the Bible until the science of archaeology dug them up. So, history in advance, the Bible story, the story of the God of the universe who came down to this earth. And what makes Christianity so real to me is that it is the only, take note, the only religion on the entire planet that not only gives a reason for the mess we are in, but gives a solution. All the other religions, you're basically dependent upon yourself to correct the mess we are in. It's called salvation by works, isn't it? Not Christianity. This is a total different kettle of fish. This is a God who not only permitted the mess so that I could have freedom of choice, he chose to bear the mess in himself to make it possible. So here I base my faith on the Bible. And if I take this God at its face value, then I have an experience. But the experience to me is not that which makes my religion function or leads me in a particular direction. It's the Word that does it.
I was waiting for you to talk about the freedom of choice. Heaven or being burned doesn't sound like a choice. That sounds like I don't want to be.
Yes, I agree absolutely, and I felt exactly like you do.
There should be an option, good and bad of both.
Good. Like Paul, I said, I'm either a slave to sin or I'm a slave to righteousness. Doesn't he say that? And I say, well, God, what's the big deal? Either way, I'm going to be a slave. I either do it your way or I fry, or I don't do it your way and I live my life and I fry anyway. I don't have a choice. I'm a slave. And then God says to me, come let us reason together. I like God. He says, come let us reason together. If I allow this universe to live in perpetual transgression, then tears will be an eternal reality. I cannot afford a universe with an eternal river of tears. So I have given a choice. I am God, I made you, I designed you, but I honor freedom of choice, and therefore I was willing to bear it in myself. But this is the bottom line. If there's no obedience to my requirements, we'll have an eternal river of tears. I say, okay, God, if I keep all of these requirements, then I'm a slave to righteousness, but now I'm a slave. And God says, yes, you are a slave to righteousness, but I give you a way out. Think the philosophy through and see if you can internalize it to the point where you say, wow, this is sublime. This makes a lot of sense. See if you can work it out in your mind till you come to the point where you say, wow, if I were God, I would do it like this. Then this idea that I've planted is no longer just my idea. It now becomes your idea. And if it has become your idea, well, then you're no longer a slave. I'll call you brother. And then I'll tell you what. You come and sit with me in, not on, in my throne. and we will rule the universe together. I'll share it with you. Man, I say, wow, I'll take that option, thank you.
You know what, Doc? I'm sorry to cut you off. We'll have to finish here. I apologize. I wish we had more time with Dr. Veith once again. But I will encourage you to go to amazingdiscoveries.org. I don't know the validity behind this. Take note of that. But the reason I pointed it out is because it has an easy link to his life story. And I encourage every one of you to watch his full testimony. It's just easier than going through YouTube, and that's why it's up here. I don't know the validity
I
behind
just
this
know
one.
there are many web pages about me. Some of them say I'm a Jesuit. Some of them say I'm a crazy conspiracist geek. Some of them say I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. So you have the whole option out there so that you have freedom of choice.
Thank you, guys. Hey, before you go, please stay seated. Stay seated. If you guys don't mind, we're just going to bow our heads and have a quick word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I just praise your name, and I thank you, dear Lord, for blessing us with the presence of Dr. Veith. Father, I ask that you may protect him, give him a safe journey back and a safe stay for the next couple of days that he's here. Dear Lord, I just ask that you may open our eyes, Father, with the eyes of faith, that we may see how your earth just screams your name, dear Lord, how the fish of the sea may sing songs of praise to you, dear Lord, how the birds in the air are just a testimony of your true creation. Father, may you dwell in each one of our hearts, Father. Cleanse us of all unrighteousness, of all iniquity. May you continue to work in each one of our lives personally, Father. May this not only be our prayer, but our experience. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you guys so much.
Starting about Monday, we'll have this one and the one from yesterday, as well as the ones done over in Loma Lindě, available on it'saboutgod.tv. It'saboutgod.tv or .net or .org or .info. But anyway, you can get it that way.
All right, keep that in mind. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for being gracious. Thank you.
It was really enlightening.
Hi.
Answering questions.
It's a pleasure.
How are you, by the way?